Welcome back to the Watch Trading Academy YouTube channel. Now I wanted to show you here these two Milles. This is an RM10, this is an RM30, and this is an RM55. And the reason I'm showing these watches today is not really to be talking about how cool this is versus that and so on and so forth. I've promised that this channel wouldn't just be about watches and do we like this watch or not, but rather I wanted to talk about somewhat of a entry-level guide to those of you that are trying to pick up your first RM and simply don't know how to gauge which RM is what, because there's so many of them and they range from like the 100K all the way up to like the million. Plus, except for those really crazy like $2 million watches, but the majority of RMs really rank between 250 to like 700. That's the core, right? And so, a lot of times we get overwhelmed because we see so many models. So I remember myself a couple of years ago, what ended up happening is I was looking for my first RM. And I was like, I gotta get an RM, right? And you guys might have seen that I bought an RM63, which is actually a circular watch. And I since got rid of that watch. It's actually a poster right here, like a painting of it. But the point here that I'm trying to make is I didn't know RMs one from the other, and what I was doing is basically trying to get my first RM. And we all know that these rectangular shaped RMs are really the more popular ones we see all the celebrities, etc. wearing. And I didn't really know what was what and what should I be buying because everything seemed to be expensive, etc. Well, I wish I would have bought all of them because now I would be making 10 times more money, right? But the point is, you can see that I have about a 7.5-inch wrist, and for me, a 7.5-inch wrist meant that some of these bigger, more bulky RMs, well, would look kind of peculiar or odd on my wrist because they looked like they were significantly oversized. And it made it kind of weird. And so I came across this RM10, which I want to show you because I want to show you how it kind of looks on my wrist. It looks actually very appropriate for the size of my wrist. And I decided that the RM10 would be the first watch that I kind of go after when it comes to the RM for me to basically wear on a day-to-day basis because it wasn't overly bulky, it didn't look like I was trying too hard, and it just fit my 7.5-inch tiny wrist. So it made sense. But for some people that obviously have larger wrists, some of these larger RMs aren't that different. But one of the concerns I had when buying my first RM is I looked all over the internet. I mean all over the internet. And I could not find a comparative guide to how different these watches are. And the reason I'm collecting these two watches here to show you because the RM10, which also shares a case with the RM05, which is the first one that can be bought for around 100, then the RM10 now is around 150 to 180, and then the RM30 here, which again is one step up from that, a larger case. But the RM5 and RM10, while two different movements, still very much similar in exact same case sizing, so they can use the same straps. Now, there are significantly other cases, like you could see that there's an RM3502. Even the RM35 Baby Nadal shares a case that is very similar to the RM10, so exact same sizing. The straps are interchangeable but need slight modifications. But the RM30, the RM11, and the RM55 are basically the next wave of heavier, larger watches. And so for that reason, for me, I never really got a feel for the larger watches because I didn't like them at the time. But one of the things that I wanted to point out here, when I was looking for watches, I couldn't find a comparative guide to really show me the differences between the two large cases. So I decided that, hey, since I have literally 3 of these RMs here, we can talk about the case sizing and what to expect if you're looking for your first RM. So let me tell you this. If you have a wrist size of 7.5 or smaller, it's going to be very hard to pull off an RM30 or an RM11 unless you put it on a Velcro strap. You can see something that happens here with the strap sizing is that the Velcro strap goes inside the case and doesn't come all the way at the edge. This creates a much smaller look on the wrist and looks a lot more appropriate on a smaller wrist. On the other hand, with the RM10, you can leave it on the factory rubber and it looks really, really pleasant and actually looks slightly bigger. So what I'm trying to say is basically for my wrist, this is a little bit too big, this is a little bit too small, and there is no casing in between the two. So the best way to go about it is to basically change the straps in order to gain some different level of design out of the watch itself. So if you're looking for your first RM and have a larger than a 7.5-inch wrist, then all of these could work for you because an 8-inch wrist will easily work on a 30, on an 11, or a 55. Now remember, one key thing is that the 30 is going to be slightly smaller than the 11 because the 11 has the pushers here and extends the case a little bit differently, which is why the straps are actually not the same for the 30 and 11, even though on the surface they have the same amount of screws on the side and seem slightly to be the same watch on the surface, but they're really not. Here you can see that the difference in the 05, 10, and the 30 is the amount of screws that really shows you how big the case size is. Typically, if you see a larger case size, you'll see more screws around the way, and this gives you an indication that it probably wears similar to a 44, 45 millimeter watch. However, if you see the smaller screws here, you'll get the idea, like less screws, you'll get the idea that it basically wears like 42 millimeter watch. Now, there are other models for RM that have the obviously thinner, ultra thin, etc. Designs, which I'm not a fan of, so I just don't want to purchase at all. But the RM10 and 30 are really good examples of entry-level RMs based on wrist sizes. You can now pick up an RM30 somewhere in the high 2s, like 260, 270, and you can pick up an RM10 somewhere in the high 1s. They're about 100K off, right? Like 80 to 100,000 off, depending on what you find, box papers, etc. So it's about 100K more of an investment, but the investment is always better on the higher end RMs. Remember, the core of RM buyers are basically between 250 to 700. They're not really the entry levels, but to be fair, the RM10 was my favorite watch for a very long time. It's incredibly comfortable, incredibly versatile, and it can be worn with and without a suit, but I really enjoyed in general on rubber. I enjoyed the 30 and the 55 here you see on factory Velcro, which creates a very different look. The other thing I would also point out is that the weight seems to be almost the same because of the entire gold casing versus the titanium and gold casing. You can see here a significant difference between the two watches, but really something that makes sense. So if you're looking for your first RM, usually I will say that the best way to go after an RM to begin with is either the 10 or the 30. These are incredible first-timer RMs depending on your budget. And they're incredible for a couple of reasons. The RM30 is not only beautiful, but they share a very similar design in the window. Again, very similar on the date, etc. The 30 is a little bit more complex than the 10. But nonetheless, one of the key things that I really enjoy about the 30 is the sizing, because it allows me to have somewhat of a 55 look, which this is the 55 Bubba Watson with a blue Velcro OEM strap. This watch right here costs $450,000, right? And this watch right here costs $200,000 less and is equally impressive. The only big things you'll notice in the differences are the movement and the design and the movement right there on the inside that looks significantly different. So do I enjoy the RM30 the best? I would say that if you're starting and wanted a more budget-friendly watch, as long as your wrist is not above 8, you can pull off the 10, but if it is, then you're going to have to save up a little bit till you can get to the 30 and 11s. You can still buy some RM11s that are more common than not rose gold, etc., in the lower tier of the 2s. I prefer going for a rose gold, much more impactful watch on the wrist in that range of dollar. But since nobody did this for me, I figured I'd do it for you and give you a good comparison of sizes between the two cases. And don't assume that just because cases look the same, that they're all interchangeable. One of the reasons in my personal collection I keep a 55 and a 30 is because they use the exact same case, and therefore all of the straps are interchangeable, and RM straps are expensive. So when you have one, you have the other, it all adds up, and in the end, it just makes sense. So there you have it, guys. I wanted to share the two. Make sure you like, turn on notifications, subscribe for more weird content like this that maybe might be off base, but will help you ultimately get in the world of watches, become better investors, and continue this trend up. And of course, don't forget our holiday sale for Watch Trading Academy is live now. Click the link in the description and join us. It's an incredible community, over 15,000 plus incredible watch traders, all there to help you ultimately learn how to invest in watches. Click the link and I'll see you inside.